Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hey everybody, this is Prescott Niles.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
And you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll.
I wanted to ask you about the recording session for Oh Mercy, because, you know, in our deep dive on Dylan's history, that comes at a really interesting time in his career. Like, you know, commercially, he had been struggling, and, you know, there's been disappointing record sales leading up to that, and in, you know, the overall story of his life, his partnership with Daniel Lanois and yourself, was really the start of a comeback that will culminated with Time Out of Mind. Can you talk about, like, how Dylan was in the studio at first, and what was the relationship like between him and Daniel and yourself, and how did it all come together?
You know, we were recording in what was called, I'd put the studio up in the dining room of this mansion, and the kitchen was open to it. So there was a counter and the fridge behind us, and then I had the studio on that side, and then it kind of made like a little horseshoe, kind of like chairs where people could sit and play, and the drums were right by the door that you came in, so it was pretty tight. And I had gotten these really ugly salmon colored curtains from this film place in New Orleans, and to like dampen the sound and cover the windows and stuff like that. And then there was a beautiful salon, like, you know, with beautiful chandeliers, and that's where I thought we would record it, and not so much in the control room. And so it ended up, you know, like for the first 2 weeks, Dylan didn't even acknowledge that I was in the room. And so he would sit down, you know, I had a chair for him and a little kind of table and, you know, a lamp. And so he had this little kind of like, you know, hangout place. And so I put the microphone in front of him, and he turns this way. So I sit in front of him, I put it over here. And so he turns over this way, and I put it over there. So he's playing with me, right? He knows I'm there, but he's just like, and then he would get up and he would go into the other room where we had 3 grand pianos in there. We had like a 1900s Steinway C grand, and we had a 1980s Steinway C B. Yeah, I think it was a B. Yeah, and we had another piano, Baldwin, from the I can't remember what's the name, from the local music store. And so Dylan would always go in there, and when he would go in there, I'd bring all the drums in there and set it out last. And as soon as I plug in the last one, he gets up and he walks back into the dining room. Got to put all the drums and put them all in there. It's like, so I was like chasing him around and stuff like that. And at one point before we had musicians in, we were kind of like cutting songs to a Roland 808 drum machine. And so like what's that song, it's on the tip of my tongue, Man in a Long Black Coat. And yeah, and so that had like an 808 drum machine, and so that one we started like pretty kind of close. Dan played bass, and you know there's another guy, Malcolm Byrne, who was supposed to be the engineer, and he ended up playing a lot on the record, keyboards and stuff, and he came up with the cricket sounds that were Brian Eno's sounds that we would borrow from Brian. But yeah, and then once we brought the band in, we brought in like different players every day. Mason Ruffner came in to play guitar, and Neville's drummer came in, and so it was all these different players. And so while we were recording, before we started with the band, Dylan was being a little bit cocky, and he didn't, really understand what Dan was going for and stuff like that. And so he would just play sloppily all the time, and it just got to Dan, and he just like he blew up. He's just like, "Wah," like fucking smarten up. And he grabs this metal dobro and he smashes it over top of the floor wedge monitor that I had. And Dylan goes completely white. I go, shit, he's gonna kill Dylan. I'm gonna go outside and I'll let them kill themselves and stuff. And so I get up, I walk outside, and I go into like a little guest house that we had in the back and got a drink. And I heard the door open and the gate close because it was like in this little courtyard where you come in and you open the gate and walk in and then come into the house. And so I heard the gate close and I went inside, and there's the dobro with a huge dent in it. And I pick it up off the floor, turn all the gear off. And then the next day, Dylan shows up and nobody says anything about it. And it's but Dylan is now talking to. And so I was sitting in the courtyard, and I had like a 1936 Harley Davidson Knucklehead that was my Harley. And then Dan had a 50s Panhead Harley, and Dylan he comes in the gate and he says my name. He goes, "Hey Mark, yeah, can you get me one of those?" And I said, yeah, sure, I can get you one. And so he goes, Dr. Victor, and he'll arrange the money. Victor was his 10-foot high bodyguard, and sits in the truck with like these huge dogs and stuff like that. And so it ended up, they took the art budget from that record, and they gave it to me to go to Florida to buy this Harley from. And the front cover is actually just a photo that Dylan took while he was on tour, just driving by this kind of like wall.
Yeah.
And so Dylan would come in every day to, he wanted to ride. And so I said, I'll ride with you and I'll show you where to ride. And so I take him down to the levee, and we drive up on the levee and drive along the Mississippi. And then once that ends, it kind of comes down and you go onto this river road, and it's full of all these antebellum mansions. And it's like all the trees are all covered, and you're like driving through this tunnel of all this like moss and stuff. And so after that, he would go out by himself. And so one day I hear him start the bike, and I hear him go around the corner, and it stops. And so I walk around and go see what's going on. And he's like 3 people standing there in front of the bike saying, "Bob, can we have your autograph?" And Bob just sat on the bike and just looked forward and pretended like there was nobody there. And so I walked up and said, "Hey, leave him alone," and I said, "Bob, you forgot to turn on the gasoline petcock, as if you don't turn that on, you don't get any gas." So he had enough gas to go around the corner. And then, so he'd go out on these rides, and he'd come back and he'd say, "Police are really friendly here, like they're all waving at me as I'm driving by." I go, "Bob, you're supposed to be wearing a helmet, first of all. There's a helmet law here in California. I know there's no helmet law, but here there's a helmet law. They're waving at you to pull you over because you don't have a helmet on."
God, you would think you would know better with what happened in the 60s, but I must say, Daniel Lanois coming after him with, that would have made a great photo for the book.